a topic,
Oh,
they've got a machine ID number associated with them.
you just went live, Bill.
Yeah, we are live, and for those of you that missed what Bill was saying there, tough. Yeah, we're here for another week. We'll have, there she is, Kristin's just joined us again. We are going to post the link live straight away, so anyone that wants to jump in and chat with us is certainly welcome to. Oh, there went Kristin again. So, while I post the live link, Bill, what have you been up to this week?
I had a great time speaking in front of a large audience with Barbara Starr. It was a SEO San Diego meetup, SEM San Diego meetup, the Letico Semantic Web San Diego meetup. We had 146 people show up in a hotel in Old Town San Diego. Listened to our presentation, asked lots of questions, and they did ask lots of questions, but we came up with some interesting stuff about search results and how Google's portraying search results that they likely didn't hear much about before.
Yeah. And it's sparking a whole new area of discussion, really, is that it used to just be about, you know, Google rankings, but now Google Display has, well, it's been developing over the past few years, but Google Display is separate to rankings and is another factor that we really need to start considering, isn't it?
It's no longer the historic 10 blue links, right? You have ratings, you have knowledge panels with different types of entities in them. There's a lot more to the actual search results, and that's probably one of the most active areas of growth of SEO in the past few years.
Yeah.
You know,
I would say, oh, sorry, Bill.
when Google starts putting things like buy now buttons in search results, that's an incredible transformation.
Yeah, I was just going to say that now I don't call it keyword research. I call it SERP research, because you'll gain more knowledge by actually looking at a SERP and figuring out, does it have a knowledge pattern? There's no tools to do that. You got to go in and do that, you know, by hand. And, you know, it's basically universal search still. That's the way I look at it. So if there's not a question there, you seek to find where you can put a question there. You'll be first, and that's a good way to dominate a SERP.
There was a researcher named Eric Wu who came out with a paper this week, and he was one of the persons behind net neutrality. He was helping to defend it. He was picking on Google because he says they favor their own properties in search results. You know, universal search, all they're doing is blending algorithmically determined results into one set of results from different repositories. So he said he didn't understand search enough to say that that was a bad thing because they were Google's own properties, and he was trying to make the point that the algorithmically determined results from the individual repositories, if you went to search like images or news or something like that, were higher quality than the blended results. It's like, okay, what are you smoking? How much did Yelp pay you to say this?
It's tricky though, isn't it? Let's face it, this has been...
When you look at the actual test, they put the competitor to Google in the left-hand side, which means it's in the first place people look. It's the hottest spot on a results page, and the results to the right of it were exactly the same. I'm surprised anybody clicked on the right-hand side.
It's one of those things. You know, we've got to look at the fact that Google has been taken to court several times, and that the evidence has convinced the court that Google were using unfair ways of promoting their own properties in the past. And that's been to court. you know, that's a closed case. It may be appealed, but so far none of them have been overturned. Now,
Doesn't mean it's right or democratic for that matter.
well, no, but they had a lot more evidence presented than we're going to be able to present in an hour's chat here today. That's just so it's said. Now, the next thing is, well, look, there were shopping search engines long before Google. And Google didn't decide to blend those into the results. It waited and built its own. And then decided to completely obliterate those by putting its own shopping search results. And that's the stuff that people are criticising Google for. And do you know what? Google Shopping still isn't as good as most of the ones that were around 10 years before it.
Yeah, but isn't Google Shopping just as good or better product?
No.
Which they have data from that as well, right? They get user data from that. So that's more useful to Google than some second or third-party site. And bottom line is, it's their website. No government should be telling them what they can do with it. I'm sorry. I just don't go along with that. That's not how a democratic society works.
But that's exactly what government is for. You know, I know John's just joined us as well, and Bill, we are big proponents of the story of the tragedy of the commons. The only role that government actually has in the entire world is to help prevent the tragedy of the commons, because businesses will destroy the world that they rely on eventually, because do you know what? There's always more advantage to getting that extra buck. If the cost is shared by everybody and they get all the profit, yeah, they're always going to do it. And we can look at companies like Microsoft. Microsoft was looking after Microsoft's own business. And when it happened to leverage that and say to Apple, look, if you put the Mozilla browser on your package as standard, we will never again give you an update for Microsoft Office. Well, that's fine. Microsoft Office is their product. Government can't tell them that they have to give the product to Apple, can they?
Right.
But they can, and they should, and that's exactly right. There's a lot of times when just because we can do something doesn't mean it's right and doesn't mean it's just, and most importantly of all, doesn't mean it's in the best interest of society. And that is ultimately what a government is there for, is to look after the best interests of society in the long term. I think they fail most of the time, but at least that's their job to try.
It's indirect taxation, nothing else.
Sometimes, yeah. But if those taxes go into things that the businesses wouldn't do, that need doing, then do you know what? I'm all for it.
Okay,
I come from a country that has healthcare. And
yeah,
I love the fact that I'm in a country that has healthcare. I love the fact that we have a social welfare system, and that everyone's success as individuals helps to raise up the bottom level. Because I think any civilization isn't measured by what the rich have. You look at the poorest person in that civilization, and that's the measure.
we have the same things in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah, and Canada actually has some of the, you know, your government is a lot saner than most. Well, until this week, I'm kicking out the guy for doing his own DIY because it was putting a Canadian out of job. Have you ever seen a British man do DIY? I guarantee you he was creating 18 jobs. Hey Fabrizio, you joined us again?
Hi everyone, hi there. Yes.
And John, good to see you. So first, let's find out what Terry's been up to this week. And he's going to tell me he's been ducking and diving. I know he is.
Well, you know, that never changes, Ammon. This week, I've been, you know, bugging people on G Plus for the first time in a while. Had a few discussions about, I don't think that stuff should be required in a job application. Schooling is special. Especially, we disagree on it, but that's because I never went above high school, but I always managed to self-teach myself everything, which that comes down to in my opinion, you're not taught that. That comes from work ethic and a few other things. if someone wants to learn, they'll learn, and they'll find the stuff. You don't have to teach someone to learn, in my opinion, but we can differ on that one.
It's one of those things. For a start, all learning is self-learning. There is no other kind. And I know John, who's got teaching experience, and of course his lovely wife, will say this as well. You can guide, but it's like that old saying, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can provide educational resources and life lessons in front of somebody, but all learning is self-learning. A teacher is there to assist somebody in teaching themselves, to a large extent. Is that about right, Joe?
Sometimes the benefit of school is providing structure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that might be the problem. I'm not real good.
Yeah, structure and resources and experience. You know, that's what a teacher is pointing you in the right direction and telling you where the resources are. And so often what goes wrong with teaching in the public school sense is that it's not the teachers, it's the administration and the politics that ruin school. So from my point of view as a former teacher, and I'm sure that Marilyn would probably agree with me to a large degree because we talk about it a lot, and that is what ruins teaching in schools is the politics. It's the demands of people trying to make political points out there. The No Child Left Behind had some decent ideas underlying the concept. You know, the No Child Left Behind, that right there, those words sound really good, except the implementation was a total disaster. It turned the schools into testing machines where everybody taught to the test so that everybody could get the scores so that they wouldn't be penalized by government because they didn't have the scores. And there was no thought or look at the economic, social standards of that particular community and whether that school was taking that situation of those children and their economic situation and moving them forward. That's really what needs to happen. Instead, the artificial bar was put here and said, everybody's got to get there. Everybody's got to get to that bar. The schools in the rich neighborhood and the schools in the poor neighborhood all had to get to the same bar. And that meant it wasn't going to work. That was doomed for failure, and it has failed.
Education has to be contextual. I mean, there is a lot of difference between a child that's brought up in a large family with plenty of examples of more advanced adults and young children around them in a culture that, you know, respects education, to somebody who's brought up in a bad neighborhood with drug users nearby where crime is seen as the career of choice because nobody really seems to know anyone that got out. You know, that's a big difference in education. I think the respect for education in the community around them is a huge part of how much they're going to be able to take from it. So, Fabrizio, what's education like in your country? You know, what are the big debates on education there?
The main of the school in Italy, from like primary school to uni, is kind of public. So from that side, and I think the overall standard is pretty high for being public. Not that public school is bad; it's just that it is very good. Point is that because of that, there's a lot of politics again, and I think that in general is not as. I mean, the way that we see mainly education is that you learn, but then real world and life and work is different. So I think, especially when I finished uni and all the stuff, the disconnection between what they teach you and then what you're gonna do at work, and I think that's a very strong gap that currently there is, because I studied marketing and business, but after uni I didn't know anything about it. And those kind of things where actually I've seen that, for example, here in UK, on some aspect is more practical, and you're more connected to what business really is, because it's not just down to books. You know, there are real companies out there, and yeah, you cannot experience everything when you study, but I guess that the more connected you are to what happening within business, the better it is.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree on what they said before on self-learning, because I was very bad at school. Actually, I just mainly did it because my parents were very keen for me to be educated. But when it comes to what I want to learn and what I want to learn by myself, is something because maybe I enjoy that and I'm more keen to do that. That's where I think that it's good to have structure from school, but then has to come from school can teach you how to have a good method, how to have the right structure, and then it has to come from you to learn. And we got many people coming to work, and they had very good uni, but then they had no appetite for learning when it comes to them coming to have a job. They've been very good at uni, they learned that structure, but then when you come to work, no one is gonna stop half an hour and say, oh, now let's learn this. You know, you have to learn either on the go or by yourself, and that's where I think it's one of the challenges.
Yeah. Bill, I've got to ask you, because of course, you know, you famously went down one course of education and kind of got to the end of that and thought, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life.
Right. I ended up with a law degree, and I watched friends join law firms and do research for big law firms or open law offices. I got a job with the local courthouse as an administrator, a legal administrator, and helped work with the public directly to help process cases through the courts. And I started teaching myself search engine optimization on the side, and started using sources like patents from the search engines to learn more.
But here's my question that is, you know, connected with what I said to Terry in that post, was how much did that education help you today? You know, it taught you ways to learn, ways to research, ways to find answers that still pay off every single day, even though you didn't go into law.
Because I learned how to break complex topics into digestible bites and approaches to solve problems. The legal training involves a lot of analyzation of problems and breaking them down to parts. So it was very useful.
Yeah, and I think that is almost unique to university. I still think school is too much teaching to the bar, as you know, John was saying. You know, the curriculum is all important. They've got to cram your head with this many facts, and it's kind of like they treat every child's mind as a jar to be filled with beans, instead of my father's famous one was treating kids' minds as a jar to be filled instead of as a candle to be lit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think universities.
When I was teaching, I felt my primary job, was to inspire the kids to learn. That's how I viewed my primary job, and that's what I focused on. How can I get these kids turned on, and then get out of their way? You know, because a child or teenager or whatever, I don't care who you are, you get inspired on a topic, on a field, and you don't have to push them anymore. All you have to do is get out of the way and give them a little nudge when they need some help, or give them some support when they need some support. But other than that, that's your job. Inspire, support, and get out of the way. You know, and that's not necessarily how people view teachers, and that's the unfortunate thing. And I think part of it came from, at least the United States, and I'm not an educational historian, so I could be way off the bat here, is that a lot of our early teaching had to do with, you know, learn your ABCs and learn how to read so that you could read and that whole reading thing, which I think is an important fundamental. I mean, you have to learn fundamentals. You're not going to be able to learn if you can't read the books. You aren't going to be able to understand our technology if you don't have the math background. So we do need those fundamentals, but they have to be in the perspective of giving you the framework in which to be inspired and move on.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and primary education, that's exactly what it's supposed to be doing. It's priming you. It's giving you the tools with which to all information, everything your mind does. What sets people apart, what sets humans apart from animals more than anything else, is our ability to manipulate symbols. That we have thought symbols, and by having symbols of thinking, we can use them as tools. Literally tools of the mind. Maths is one of those frameworks for manipulating those symbols. Language is certainly another. Without the written language, you don't have puns. So much of that is about the multiple meanings of a word based on one slight spelling difference or something like that. These are all things that absolutely depend. So early education, 100% agree with you. I'll put up, Zara says exactly the same thing. Agrees with you 100%. Now, we understand primary school is, you've got to give them the basic tools, but secondary school ought to be much more. I think they try to do this an amount, and this is the equivalent of high school. Give them a taste of lots of things so they can see where their strengths and interests lie, and I think that's great. But that's playing exactly to what you were saying. Find their inspiration and get out of their way. Give them a set of topics, find the one that inspires them, and then let them run with it.
And give them the resources that make it capable, make it possible for them to learn. I was talking to a friend. I was talking to a friend earlier today about building an app involving local history that might use an API, like an Alchemy API, take pictures of local botany and identify it for you and tell you what the things are. Let you explore the world that way.
Yeah. Well, another thing that happens in this whole process is that once you get somebody really into wanting to learn, then it's easier to step back with them and say, okay, in order for you to take the next step, you're going to have to sit down and learn all these rules. But the difference is that you have given them the context in which they're going to make that commitment of learning those rules, whether it's mathematical theorems or whether it's scientific principles or whether it's legal, in your case, Bill, the various laws and regulations that one must learn in order to function in that world. If they're really inspired about getting into that and doing it, then stepping back and saying, okay, I need to get out my flashcards and learn this stuff so that I can then use it to do the thing that I'm inspired about. So it's a back and forth between the inspiration and the perspiration of learning the gritty details that help you, the tools, the rake and the hoe and the shovel kind of stuff, so that when you are done, you've got a beautiful garden that you can really enjoy.
We're definitely not going to leave Terry out of this, because I know he had one of the toughest schools of all, the kitchens. As a chef, those places are, you've got somebody there who's going to teach you, but he expects you to learn real sharp, doesn't he, Terry? You're muted. You're muted, Terry.
So, yeah, you get used to taking abuse. My favorite was a teacher once asked me if I was a twin. I said, why? He said, because you're dumb enough for two.
Oh.
Oh, gee. That's brutal.
Yeah, but I've heard worse. You know, Chef Ramsay's a bit like a prince compared to some of the guys I've worked for.
Yeah.
But you get used to it. You get a thick skin. You also learn pretty quick. You don't make the same mistake twice, I'll tell you that much. And that's how they really decide who's going to move up. The guys who can take that pressure and the guys who move up quickly. And the guys who come in and work extra for nothing always move along pretty quickly.
I think one of the reasons that that kind of education works well, and you know, apprenticeships generally work well, is that the learning's less abstract. There are sadly teachers who have got their curriculum, and okay, I've got to teach you this, this, and this. Right, so we're going to do this subject, and they don't bother to tell the kids how it applies to real life.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I had a physics teacher at school teaching, you know, science and physics. That he was great. You know, early on, he showed us some fantastic calculations he made by knowing, you know, about the force of gravity, about knowing acceleration due to gravity, these kind of things. You know, and he would always throw us a problem or an example of something. You know. Such and such is 10 feet away. This is falling from there. Can you get a cushion under it in time? How long do you have? Even though it was a very simple thing, it appealed to kids, and it suddenly made what they understood now that these were tools because he'd shown them what it could build. And I think there is a tendency to forget that and sometimes make the tools their own lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've often believed that SEO is tailor-made for an apprenticeship. That companies, instead of throwing a guy through these different things, should think it through and build an apprenticeship, actually, rather than moving a guy willy-nilly between different stuffs, and they never really understand how it all works together.
The problem is, you know, this was one of the things back in the day with Fresh Egg. We started an internship. And this was for people already familiar with SEO ideally, but we opened it up to anyone. But the only way it could work is that myself and Lee Colbrand at Fresh Egg were A, very experienced ourselves, and B, there was no set course. What we did was we took in whoever came, and then we would play to their strengths and make them the best SEO that we could within that time, according to what they could learn that would be most effective. And the idea was that we would take anybody from somebody currently working as an SEO to up their game, maybe somebody who was already a very good SEO but didn't know how to raise their profile. Well, here's how you do that. If that's what's going to be of most use to your career, then let's go that way. We'll explain to you the business models of SEO and different ways of charging, different deliverables. You know, we'll talk about the marketing of SEO itself. Or we might have somebody who was you know, a mid-level marketing executive in a company who hired a lot of SEOs and wanted to understand more about it to make better hiring decisions. Great. We would take them in and work on those skills, how to assess an SEO, how to make a better campaign.
Yeah. For me, in the apprenticeship as a chef, right, I went from like basic mass cooking to soup station, then to sauce, then to meats, then you go to baking. And you know what? During the way, they realized I was excellent at sauces and that sort of thing in soup. So I ended up kind of being like a sous chef on the sauce and that kind of stuff, because that's what I love doing. Like, to me, a good chef knows how to make the best sauce. Those are what usually makes the dish, right?
Yeah, I've known a few chefs on the sauce myself.
Well, you never find wine in a kitchen. That's why you learn how to use wine vinegar to do the same thing, because wine is actually only added for the acidity, right? So you add vinegar, and we drink the wine.
Now, I don't know if John's been aware of the conversation so far, but we're kind of talking about education generally here. Earlier in the week, Terry saw a job ad that asked for a degree and 2 years of experience, and he said, you know, most of the SEOs he knows couldn't apply for that job. And I said, well, actually, I kind of like it because it's setting an expectation level. It doesn't. If you go to them and you're a great SEO and you don't have the degree, you're still going to be able to talk to them, but you already know you need to prove you've got the same kind of clout. So on that basis, I kind of like it. Now,
for me, I see them as snooty people who want these things. So, you know, usually if I see it helps, I'm okay with it. But if it's required, it means they come from that background too and not conducive to the way I work. You know what I mean? Like, I don't work well with really well-educated people. Too often they have a stick up there. And it just doesn't go.
Well, John doesn't really have that choice because, you know, Google are pretty firm on their thing. You know, if you haven't got a degree, you're not really going to get in a lot of the time. There's a strong academic background to Google, isn't there, John? So how flexible is that? You know, how are people who don't have the degrees treated?
It works. There are always people without degrees that are hired too. So it's not like an absolute requirement. But I think it's something where, like you said, if you don't have that degree, then you do kind of have to show that you're willing to kind of stick through it and actually provide something really useful. I think the degree itself isn't really what I find really important. It's more the fact that this is someone who you know has been able to take the time to like focus on one problem, like getting this degree, and work at it for a number of years, even though it's probably not always really fun and interesting. So it kind of shows that you're willing to battle things out and work your way through to the root of some problem.
Mm-hmm.
In the past 1 year or so, we have been involved in hiring, and then we have trained like from 5-6 interns and then junior people. But what we have seen, obviously, when someone comes in, the difference between 3 months to 1 year experience, it doesn't make too much difference in terms of how much someone is ready to learn and improve. And also, when it comes to degree, we had people with very high degree that were unable to add a column to Excel, but then at the same time, because of the degree, we have seen how people were able to pick up and move faster. I think most of the time, probably in large companies, they used to have that as a guideline, but obviously it is down to people who hire eventually. I think it's quite stupid someone would hire a person just because of that event.
I've seen a really wide range of degrees for people who work in SEO, covering many different fields. You know, when you have somebody who's got a degree in like molecular biology doing SEO, and people with law degrees, and maybe they're bringing things that they learned in those disciplines to what they do on a daily basis. But
I started chemistry. So then I didn't finish that. But it was,
was Pierre Farr's microbiology or something like that? It was something along those lines, wasn't it?
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah,
and you know, that's a guy who was very well up on his SEO generally before he went to Google, and he's done some phenomenal work there with you know, Webmaster Trends over time, and I'm looking forward to him sharing more about what he's doing now, because he's been remarkably quiet. Nudge him, John. Tell him he's not telling us enough.
I believe, if I remember correctly, that he's gone into paid search.
He's a product manager, and I think it's for the AdWords mobile, basically, that kind of area. But I'm kind of guessing a bit there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you guys will notice when things are ready. So it's I don't know if he wants to share more in the meantime, because I know he's pretty busy.
Yeah, we don't want him to spill the beans on the product necessarily, but we'd kind of like to know you know, what he's doing, and sometimes that's talking about the kind of problems you're dealing with in a way that doesn't say what the product is, but it, don't you find whatever field we're in, you know, we all share a lot of the same kind of issues with how do we deal with this and how do we deal with that, how do we deal with problems? Hey Jeff.
How are you? I
don't know if he wants to share more in the meantime, because I know
you've got the video playing there, mate? There you go.
We don't want him to spill the beans on the product necessarily, but we'd kind of like to know.
We've got the time warp going. Turn that video off. There we go. So Jeff, you made a great comment a minute ago, and it was too long for the comment tracker. So
don't you find whatever field we're in, you know?
Jeff, you with us?
I am now. Sorry, I had to close the window. Sorry about that.
Okay. Saying you made a great comment a minute ago, and it was much too long for the comment tracker. So.
I would say, Ammon, is that it's important for teachers to understand that there's different types of learning. Some people learn with their ears, and some with their eyes, and some with their hands. And if you just make a general assumption that you can step back and just arm them with information, is you are maybe absent of the fact of whether you've given them the information they need.
Yeah.
There used to be, back in, I know Marilyn's talked about this a lot, there used to be very popular the whole idea of the modes of learning and the channels of learning that individual children have. And this is one of, again, the frustrations of the current educational scene in the United States, and that is that concept has been thrown out the window. It's, everybody is a round peg, and they get jammed into a round hole. Whether you're square or triangle, it didn't matter. And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be a very common concept that you looked at how a child learned, and you looked at how a person learned, and you worked to their strengths. And so I would agree with you, Jeff. That's a critical part of teaching, is looking at how an individual learns and playing to their strength. And that's part of what a teacher is supposed to know how to do.
The thing that always struck me about that is it's quite obvious with a lot of children, because they will tend to excel in the practical subjects and do very poorly in the more academic. That's telling you how they learn, not what they learn. And yet it gets missed, and you got a kid. Oh yeah, he's happy in woodshop, but he's not a bright spark. Yes, he is. It's just he learns with practical examples. If he can get his hands on it, if he can feel what he's doing, that makes a lot more sense to him than the abstracts. And go on, Bill. You
right. One of the best educational opportunities I had during work was a train-the-trainer set of classes where we talked about adult learners and different styles they might have to learn. And that may not be the way we teach children now, but it was really effective in terms of teaching me how to teach people well. And so I had to learn sometimes to be creative. I had a court clerk who was hired in my office who had never really used computers before. And I showed her how to play solitaire. And because she was really uncomfortable holding a mouse. So I said, if anybody gives you a hard time, play this game. Learn how to use the mouse. And she started doing that and got really good. Within a year of her starting working there and learning how to use a computer, she was training other people in the office sophisticated sentencing programs that people would use to sentence people within a courtroom as the judge was handing them sentences. So she grew a lot in terms of her ability to use a computer well because of a game.
And it's something we all deal with daily. This may sound like a conversation about education, but actually, I bet you there isn't one single person in this hangout who doesn't regularly have to educate people. Because when you're dealing with clients, they will have questions, and sometimes that's based on things that they don't. And the only way to properly answer that question is to be able to give them a very quick, basic education in that field. And John, whatever projects you're working on, I'm sure you have to bring colleagues that are working on completely other different things up to speed very quickly and educate them onto, you know, where you're at and what the issues are and how to work together. So this is actually a conversation about teaching, which is part of human existence. We all teach and we all learn every single day. And if you don't know how to teach, you're going to be so restricted in the clients you can have and in how well those relationships develop.
Hey, Ammon?
Yep.
Yeah. One other comment too about that is I did help outs last year with Google, you know, for home inspections after 25 years, bringing my experience about that and teaching other people about their homes. I was amazed how much I became more knowledgeable about my subject by being forced to teach people rather than just being.
Amen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know we've all often commented on that. I remember, you know, back in the days at Creator Site, and I saw John nodding away there. You know, this was a thing we often said. You know, you think you know your subject, teach it to somebody, and you will discover a whole new way of looking at it.
Have people ask you day after day after day the same questions in a forum setting, and give them answers that everybody can learn from.
Yeah.
It takes a bit of creativity.
Yeah, that was the first way Bill and I came to each other's attention, and the first time that other people started to notice what we did was, yeah, you know, people would be asking the same questions day after day after day, and in some forums, a lot of the forums of those days, people would say, learn a search, or go search for your topic, and instead, you know, well, look, if they knew how to do that, they probably would have done it. Posting is actually a big step for a lot of people. That first post, that first question, is a big step. They didn't usually make it lightly. So instead, take their question and hopefully put a new twist on it. Okay, you're new here, let's answer that, but let's also have a new way of looking at this, that, you know, with a different example or something that everyone can learn from. Because do you know what? Revisiting the basics is the only way to avoid assumptions. You should always examine every question, no matter how many times you've been asked it, fresh each time. Because do you know what? One of these days the answer will have changed.
That's true.
I found that with mentoring, that a lot of times someone would ask me a question, and I would think, I should go and find out for sure before I answer this. Yeah, especially when I was doing that with some SEOs early on. Yeah, one in particular, Bob Gladstein, kept me on my toes a lot. After a while, I said it's the student teaching the teacher now.
I taught at a local community college a class on internet literacy for school teachers, and they had a series of classes they could take. If they passed a certain number, they got a certificate, which meant they got paid more, which was good incentive to get them to learn. But I was teaching internet literacy and showing them things like how to do a print screen image from a computer desktop and insert it into a Word document. And that made their day, because all of a sudden they were able to teach students tutorials about things they found on computers, which made life a lot easier for them. You know, I did go through the dangers of searching for things like White House. You know, what's the URL for the White House website? And at the time, whitehouse.com was not a nice place to go. And I didn't want them to do that in their classroom.
It's a funny old journey, admittedly, but you know, education is something that it's critical, and it comes down to the fact that in life there are two stages. You're learning or you're dead and you haven't fallen over yet. That's it. You know, life is a learning journey. It's a learning experience, and the day that's over, put on the wooden overcoat. It's finished.
Mm-hmm.
You know, too, one other thing, Ammon, on that is, it seems for me at least, learning comes in stages. I'll, you know, have incremental growth, and all of a sudden, somebody will just trigger my mind, and there'll be a plateau jump with a whole new layer of understanding. So, it's really important for me. Sometimes what makes me take it to the next level is the simplest of things, just like you said. Someone shows me a very basic thing, and then it just triggers, and everything falls into place. So, I do agree. It's always important to visit the questions.
Yeah, and it's amazing where you can learn from. I mean, I try and keep myself open to a whole range of things, because do you know where I learned more than anywhere else about customer personas was years and years ago when I was a kid and interested in acting and went to drama classes and belonged to an amateur dramatic association, and learning to understand another character in order to portray it taught me a hell of a lot about putting myself into other people's shoes. And I think almost everyone should have acting lessons, because I think it does give you a better understanding of other people, of other perspectives. But can't.
Yeah.
Where has somebody else picked up some odd thing? You know, it doesn't seem related, but it's been something that's helped them out ever since. Come on, I know everybody's got at least one somewhere.
One thing I always find fun is, or interesting, is when someone comes to you with a question and it's kind of an easy question, and you say, well, I could answer this really quickly, but what are you really trying to achieve? And to kind of turn a question around from, like, how do I do this, into why are you doing this, and shouldn't you rather be doing something completely different, that's always, I think, something that helps those people a lot to kind of take a step back and think about, yep, why are we actually doing this? I see that a lot still in like the webmaster forums, where people will say, well, how do I use this meta tag, or how do I do this with canonicals, or whatever. And actually, when you look at the problem, you notice that they're trying to do something completely different. They're not really trying to use that specific technical tool. They're trying to solve a problem that they think they can solve with that, but it actually doesn't help there at all.
Yeah. And thank you, John, because you actually gave me one of the nicest comments I remember in the days back in Create. So, you know, I asked, it was one of those landmark birthdays, and I said, you know, well, what have I done for you? Because this is how I like to celebrate my birthdays, look back at what I've achieved and give myself some impetus to move forward. And you said that what I'd done was show you that sometimes it's not about answering the question, it's about giving people better questions. You know, it's not the answer, it's giving people better questions. And I've taken that to heart, and I do think that is such an important point, that often people can only ask the question. Stephanie Sims often talks about the unknown unknowns, and you can't know what you don't know. You can only ask the question that you've seen so far, and sometimes what you need to do is look at where they are and think about the next 3 questions that they don't even know yet, because they haven't got past this one, and help them get to the answer that they need in the end, instead of just what they're asking right now.
Yeah, that's very good.
I would also say, Ammon, is that some people ask questions that they're really not ready to have answered. They're just not at that level. So they're working on their addition and asking you questions about calculus. I think it's incumbent to, you know, make sure that they stay kind of focused in their skill sets. There's many times that I branch off and try to do things I'm just not capable of, and it just turns out to be wasted time for me and everybody.
Yeah. Sometimes you certainly do have to, you know, say, you know, that's great, and we're getting there, but we have to go through these and explain why they've got to go through the other stages first. And certainly we've seen that.
Sometimes it helps to approach things with a different perspective. Like, for instance, I've been trying to teach myself SEO by looking at a lot of search-related patents and white papers. And I take what I look at and try to base it upon my experiences and what I've seen and what I've learned from other patents and so on. And I started working with Barbara Starr, who has a much faster computer science education and background than I do. And, you know, looking at a patent with her, she'll emphasize some point that I never would have considered and say something about it, and it's like seeing something new for the first time.
Yeah.
So,
and I do think that was something that the forums and the places like G+ are superb for, is get yourself that mastermind group. Your circles should be people who can help you see the things you miss, to look at things from a new angle, because you know what, we've each got a personality type, we've each got a perspective, and some things can't be seen from the perspective we're in. You know, from the front, that looks like a nice solid brick wall. It's only when you get to the side you see it's a painted backdrop on canvas. And sometimes you need to get those different angles.
Yeah. To take that point that Jeff made about the question that is kind of over their head, oftentimes you can take that as an opportunity to inspire somebody to work up to that question. Like, okay, that's a question you want to ask, but you're not going to be able to get there yet. But you can get there if you learn these things and ask these other questions. So sometimes having that question that is way out there becomes an inspiration. You know, when you look up at the stars and you wonder what's going on out there, clearly that's beyond most of us. But if it inspires you enough to go back and learn the astrophysics and the math to do the physics, then that was an appropriate question. You just had to work up to it.
Yeah.
You know?
And this comes back to that thing I was saying about, you know, the tools of the mind, concepts, the ways that we symbolize concepts being tools of the mind, is that there are tools out there you're not skilled enough to use yet. You know, and even if I gave you that tool, you can't use it safely yet. And I sometimes think that this applies to the internet, where people find WordPress and plugins that, okay, it's there, but it's actually more advanced than you think. And yeah, you can jump in and play with it, and by all means do that, but don't expect this to be an instant success, because there's a lot of learning involved to use this tool correctly.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot with WordPress type. You know, I see that in WordPress and Joomla and Drupal. People dive into that, and it's not to discourage them, but they do get in over their head real quick, and there's nobody there saying, okay, that's a little far for you. You need to step back and do this, and then you'll be able to do that. And that oftentimes isn't in the framework of the way these tools are presented.
I think.
I was going to generalize that too, John, even a little bit more. Is you know, if I walk up physically to something, I see a 500-pound weight, I just know I'm not going to lift it. But I may see a 500-pound mental problem, and I'm just like kind of like telling myself, I got this, no problem. So you know, this it's a weird paradox where we you know, trick ourselves sometimes, especially in mental problems.
What was that lump on the back of your head? Oh, I got myself a mental hernia.
Oh no!
But Terry, I mean, we had an advantage, didn't we? And Bill and most of you actually, is that we started when the net was simpler, when brochure sites were kind of the norm, and as the technology got more complicated, we'd been growing with it. We were kind of ahead of the curve anyway. But I do sometimes think that, you know, somebody who's just getting to grips with it today, there's so many options, there's so many big sparkly tools, it must be so hard. It's got to be.
Yeah. I love the semantic web stuff, and I think the schema.org tools are great, but they've started beefing them up and improving them and adding like examples and things like JSON-LD that are brilliant additions. And the fact that Google's added those has made them a lot easier to understand and use. You know, remember the technology from the web when you first started out may have been, here's how you create a link to another page, another document. You've built a web page. Yeah, it's functional. It does what it's supposed to do. Now you have all these things with like schema markup. That's completely different. You're adding specificity to the data you're putting on pages that they never had before, and you're making it easier for a search engine to understand those things. And you know that's quite a leap for a lot of people.
I'd
And it would have
love
been
to
quite a
see.
leap for all of us.
I'd love to see schema get leaner, though. I see too many pages where, to add the amount of markup they want, they're adding a lot of code. And at the very same time, we are dealing with the mobile, where everything's about speed, and the less code on your page, the better. And we can understand this is a balancing act, but I think a lot of new people sometimes struggle with that. Go on, Terry.
Yeah, I think that's the way it's written. People put it in before they do their HTML. I always make a point of trying to use the HTML that's already in place, the containers, and adding the schema stuff into, rather than making special spans and divs for the schema. Takes a little more thinking, but it also means you do it after all the HTML is in the page. It also makes it much easier to write it and add it, because quite often I'm adding it to program pages. So once I figure it out, I do it once and it goes across many places, right? So I think a lot of it has to just do with the implementation as far as the verbose coding.
And I agree with you there. I do think that if a site today wants to go, fully compatible with Schema, wants to really make use of Schema as part of their website, I think you're best looking at a full redesign of the code itself, and almost building from the ground up. You've got the data at the back end, but I think the front end HTML should be rewritten to really have that structure in it properly in the first place.
And part of it is a lot of people aren't doing it by hand. They're using plugins, which I'm working with a company now. They started to do that, and I just said no. Hey, when you add a plugin, you now are at the mercy of that plugin. And is it doing it right? And if it's not doing it right, how much of a problem is it going to be to undo it? And, I just think every time you add a plugin to a website or to WordPress, it makes the whole thing that much more complicated. That, you're going to have, next thing you know, your child theme's the size of your regular theme, so you can keep everything, up to date. And I prefer to do it right in the code, and don't really understand that child web thing. I guess I should learn that, but I know where I've made these changes, so if I have to change it again, it's a 5-minute job. I'm not going to sweat it.
And I think that in general is also difficult when people go straight away to the plugin. It's difficult to go back and go the other way around. So and even for the whole plugin thing, even though I'm quite young, I've been online since day one, so I've seen when there was no plugin. But now younger generation, they used to deal with plugin, but then when they need to understand the structure behind it and they have to decompose the plugin going back, that's where if something changed that the plugin cannot do, that there's a problem. And that's something.
Also, I'd say web design or webmasters now, less and less, can write HTML. It's a shame. It's dreadful, actually. WordPress has made webmasters the laziest on the planet.
There's a Google search engineer by the name of Steve Yegi who writes about programming every once in a while, and he's renowned for his rants. And he wrote one about plugins, where he talks about how good software should be plug-in capable. It should enhance itself by being extendable in a way like that, and be a platform that's useful.
I'm a big fan of extensibility, and When CSS came along and made every website kind of extendable in its way, I love that. I love the fact that you can have custom JavaScript and custom CSS to change other people's sites. Brilliant. That's exactly what the web should be. But what I'm against is there is a tendency to want to do something and immediately look for a plugin. And this is akin, let's go right back to Terry in the kitchens. I want to cook stew. Right, I'm going to try and find an electronic stew maker. Let's see what JML have made that instantly makes stew for me. No! Learn to do it right, then find the tool to help you, rather than go straight for the tool. If you have a new idea for your website or something you want to do with your business, don't straight away look to see if there's a plugin to do it. First, deal with how you will do it yourself. Understand all of the implications behind it, and then find the tool that suits how you want to do it, instead of what almost always happens is people changing what they want to do according to what tools are available. That's the wrong way to go around. Let's do a final wrap up. We'll kick off with Bill. Bill, what are you up to this week?
I was talking with a friend this morning about the possibility of building an app for local use, where people could learn about the history of the area and maybe find restaurants or stores or whatever else using the app to guide them through the place. So if you wanted to learn about the history of Carlsbad, which is a resort area, you could download this and maybe take a self-guided tour. Go from place to place.
Cool. Make it extensible so that other towns and villages nearby can plug in and expand the networks until it fills up the whole of San Diego.
Next billionaire, Bill.
Yeah.
That would be fun. Yeah.
Fabrizio, you're next over on the list from my view. What are you up to this week?
I'm gonna continue. I started this weekend. We started a site migration for a client, and due to a redesign just to make it mobile friendly, but then took like about 2 years. So funny enough, when people were shouting and trying to get new customer with mobile, that's something that for some companies it cannot be done within a week. But then we're kind of in a delicate stage because the site has been redesigned, but at the same time some components cannot be migrated to the new platform, and we're talking about like 1 million user a day website. So probably we need John's blessing in terms of what's gonna happen next. But yeah, hopefully we covered everything and it should be fine.
I must admit, the term site migration has always made me smile. I remember once I had a web host. My site went south so regularly I swore that was migrating as well. Yeah. Jeff, what are you up to this week?
I'm doing local small business marketing. In the real estate industry, the realtors a lot of times tend to be the source for future business clients that buy a house. So I'm going to go tackle realtors. I'm going to go to a couple of their marketing meetings, introduce myself, personally shake some hands, and let them know I'm open for business and ready to serve them and their clients.
Excellent, excellent. Because networking is so important. That's something Vin and I discussed on our last show, and I'm sure you'll be finding we'll be dealing with that again, because it's absolutely there. John, what are you up to this week?
Which John?
You.
Oh, me. Okay. I'm doing what I like to do, and that is teaching. I'm just working on getting the next show that we have coming up ready and thinking about all the things I'm going to ask the panel, and at the same time I'm thinking a month ahead about the show after that, and so I'm spending a lot of time and I'm learning incredible amounts of stuff. I'm going around watching what other people are talking about. I'm really enjoying your and Vin's show because I'm grabbing a lot of neat ideas that I want to incorporate. Yeah, I'm in hog heaven. What can I say?
Nice. So the other John.
Give us the secret stuff, John. Not butcher. Give us the secret stuff.
Yeah, I'm tending the black and white animals this week. No, Um, I've been working on so many docs for such a long time now that I decided I need to spend some more time doing some programming. So I've been messing around with a bunch of our APIs, trying things out. I have a lawnmower robot which I want to get running in, I don't know, this third year that I've been messing with it. So hopefully I'll have some time to get some code written.
Excellent. Excellent. Coding is therapeutic, isn't it, in its own way?
Yeah.
Terry.
I'll be continuing, producing video for the site, and I think tomorrow's a holiday here in Canada. It's Canada Day. So I've decided I'm going to spend the day on Ancestry.com. I want to look up my heritage, see what jail we came from.
Nice. Like, see if any country wants to admit that your roots were there.
Well, I know I had a history teacher in grade 9 told me that our family was one of the first in Elgin County, which was one of the first counties that was settled in Canada. So I'm going to start there and see, where it takes me.
Cool. I would imagine that if you're going to find much British blood, you're probably going to find it's Scottish. The Scots loved Canada, so I think there's a high chance.
Dutch. I know it's Dutch.
Cool.
Know that much, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, it was the three cultures, wasn't it? The French, obviously, the Dutch, and the Scots. The Scots, I don't know, they didn't get enough snow at home. What was it?
You're right, Ammon.
Newfoundland. Newfoundland. You go to Newfoundland, they talk like Scottish people.
But probably with less swearing, or you haven't met enough Scottish.
Probably more.
Definitely more.
Vin, you joined us late. What are you up to this week?
Just trying to survive.
Yeah. Are you melting away up in your loft space there?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm tempted to keep talking to you now, and we can watch as the sweat starts to build up.
Yeah, I got to turn the AC off so you can actually hear me.
Yeah. Well, that's all we got time for. Been a great week again, and thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks for tuning in, and let's have another chat next week. Take care.
Thank you.